Speaking into the microphone.
Can I get one more mic check?
Another mic check.
All right, guys. Can everyone hear me okay? Working? Awesome. Before we start, I just want to once again say thank you to our sponsors. They're right there. Take a look. They've been very helpful in this whole thing. Also want to remind everyone to take the feedback, fill the feedback forms out. There's one on the schedule website, and there's also one on your ticket in your email. So please do that. That'll help us improve this for next year. So I'd like to introduce Andrey and Matan to talk about, let's see, Scan Pwn Next.
Thanks. Hi, guys. So, welcome everybody, and good afternoon. We're going to, as we said, discuss service accounts in Windows networks. So if everybody is here, we'll just get started.
Anybody remember how to defeat an electronic keypad?
Oh, don't even joke about that, Martin. Those things are impossible.
Think I'm joking?
This might work.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Right. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. I'll give it a shot.
A classic, right? Sneakers. Everybody here, you're at BSides, so I guess everybody remembers that one. Yeah. Okay, for those who haven't seen it, you must go and see it now. So, since the days of sneakers, up to the days of Mr. Robot, a lot has changed in the IT industry and in our networks, but one of the things that remains for a very long time are services and automated processes. Both those operating in our environment to access other stuff and those services that we can access in our systems. We are going to discuss how those services and the accounts that those services use actually expose our networks to attacks by attackers and what you can do about it in order to mitigate that attack vector. So who are we? My name is Andrey Dulkin, and I'm the head of research for CyberArk Labs. I've been doing targeted attacks research for the last bit over 15 years. In my spare time, I do some Raspberry Pi and Android development, so if any of you have some interesting projects that you would like to discuss, I'll be happy to hear about them. And
Hi, I am Matan Hart. I'm a security researcher at CyberArk Labs. Formerly, I was in the IIF and IDF as a malware analyst. And I like to do CrossFit, so if anybody wants to suffer with me this evening, is welcome. So, Kerberos is a network authentication protocol which is based on tickets and secret key cryptography. In Windows networks, the domain controller is responsible for authentication, and it uses Kerberos as the main, as the default authentication protocol. But, however, the authorization is performed by each service. So how does the service know who to authorize? So Microsoft extended the Kerberos protocol to include additional authorization data, also known as PAC, which include information from the Active Directory, such as group memberships, authentication silos, login hours, etc. So the service can decide to authorize based on that information in the ticket. Service accounts are principals that are running services and are used as the security context of the service. So in Windows networks, there are two main accounts: computer accounts and user accounts. Computer accounts are making some tasks such as retrieving and enforcing GPOs, and are used by the computer. And user accounts are used by humans to access resources such as emails. Because there's no service accounts in the Active Directory, usually the computer account will be used as the account for the service is running on, but sometimes even standard user accounts, which are used by humans, will be used as the service account.
So when we are using user accounts as service accounts, basically we have services, automated processes running user accounts. There are many differences from between those accounts configuration and the accounts that are used by standard users. Probably the most relevant one is the fact that the password policies for those accounts will be different. So if our standard users are changing their password every 90 days, it is very often that for accounts that are used for services, their passwords are set to never expire, for example, and the password complexity can be different. It is also often the case that those accounts can be overprivileged. I'm sure all of you have visited Stack Overflow or similar websites where people ask questions on how to configure, how in order for some service to work, and one of the worst recommendations that they usually get is you probably don't have sufficient permissions or some privileges, just raise them and then configure it later to reduce it, and that later time never comes, right? So they are left overprivileged. There are issues with delegation. We are not going to go into that, but usually service accounts have some ways to delegate the privileges of others. And in general, those service accounts expose larger attack surface. When we talk about attack surface, basically we mean that attackers have more ways to exploit them than standard user accounts. For example, we said that this account is running a service, so perhaps that service has some vulnerabilities that an attacker can exploit. And then hijack the credentials. We say that the service is potentially running on multiple machines, and if an attacker can get to any of them, they might be able to hijack the credentials of that service, as opposed to human users who are just using one machine, right? So there are differences here. And in general, when we discuss services, we discuss two types. Now, the terminology here is our own, so, but it makes it easy to distinguish between those services that are using accounts in order to go out into the network, in order to access other network resources, and we have services that are listening for incoming informations that we are going to call them the in services. They will usually have associated SPNs. So we will start with the out services, basically those services that are going, or automated processes that are going out into the network. And we will start by looking into an attack, a breach that happened about a year ago at a major US retailer, where an attacker, they were able to hijack the credentials of a single traveling salesperson of that organization. As an anecdote, the IT personnel of that organization said that that guy had his password on a sticky note on his laptop, so it wasn't such a sophisticated hack. But all the attacker got was a way into the Citrix portal of that organization. Now, from that Citrix portal, the attackers were able to find machines in the network, and on those machines, the attackers found multiple VB scripts configured to operate inside the network, conduct various tasks, all of them configured to use a domain admin account. Okay? So people here know that this is problematic. And what the attackers did with that is they used those credentials in order to get to the point of sales, over 6,000 point of sale devices where they installed the malware and stole lots and lots of credit card info from. So that single account configured in those VB scripts was highly lucrative for the attackers.
Good morning, gentlemen. Please be seated. I see we're still dressing in the dark, Eugene.
Once again, don't call me Eugene. Our recent unknown intruder penetrated using a super user account, giving him access to our whole system.
Precisely what you're paid to prevent.
Someone didn't bother reading my carefully prepared memo on commonly used passwords. Now then, as I so meticulously pointed out, the four most used passwords are love, sex, secret, and God. So, would Your Holiness care to change her password?
Okay, this movie is recognized, right? Hackers, what year? 1995. Okay. So, very close. It's a 20-year-old movie discussing the same problem we are dealing with today. There are super user accounts in our networks that, if hijacked by attackers, will enable them to do what they want in the network. And very often, those overprivileged accounts are service accounts as they are used by automated processes. Now, we conducted a research throughout 2015 where we examined dozens of real-world networks. We have our tool, CyberArk DNA. It's a free tool that any of you can run. And basically what it does, it scans the network and it looks for the privileged accounts. And it looks not just for the privileged accounts and their configuration, but also for where the credentials of those privileged accounts are. And we gathered this information from over 70 networks in order to conduct this research. Just as an anecdote, here are some of the interesting finds of DNA from various networks. For example, in this network we found a server where all the domain users were configured to be power users. So basically any domain user is an administrator on that network, on that server. We found administrators running jokes over administrative accounts. So in this case, the account name is Batman. It's an administrative account. And the account description says, who wants to be the brave soul to disable it? And then Nick became brave on September 9th. The account is disabled. We found the temporary service accounts set up as administrative accounts. So again, this is one of those Stack Overflow, right, examples, where somebody sets up a temporary account, runs it excessive privileges, and it just gets left behind. And we even found the access obfuscated here, but basically this is an application account that has been used by security control in that network, where somebody has put the password for the account in the account description. So as you all know, the account description is available to any user in the network. So that's nice. One of the things that we do with DNA is we map credentials in the network. Now, as you know, in Windows network, whenever you establish an interactive session to a computer, to a machine, you actually leave your credentials on that machine, right? Because either the hash or the ticket, sometimes the password itself is left behind. So what we do is we access every machine and we look for the credentials on that machine, and we put an arrow saying, on that database server 2, there is some credential that could be used by an attacker to gain administrative privileges to that file server 1. And on that file server 1, there is some other credential that could be used to access that IT file server 1, okay? So we are just mapping those routes that attackers could take inside the network. Just as an example from a single scan, you can see here we naturally anonymized all the accounts, but you can see the account name, you can see whether it is used by service or automated process. You can see the thread count. The thread count is on how many machines out of the thousands that we scanned in this environment there are credentials for that account. The victim count is how many machines would be compromised if an attacker hijacked that account. The groups that account belongs to, the password age, and password whether it set to never expire. And you can see, for example, this account 18, you can't see because it's red and the sun is against us. But it's a service account that is present on over 300 machines. The credentials of it are present on over 300 machines. They can be used by an attacker to compromise over 1,000 machines in the network. The password age, again, as you can see here, is over 5,000 days old. 5,000, okay? And the password is naturally set to never expire. So this single account, whose credentials are present on over a third of the machines, can be used to compromise the entire network. And what we do is we created this metric, and we split all the networks that we examined into one of three groups: the low risk, the medium risk, and the high risk. And this is just the risk according to the service accounts. And then again, you can see, except for the pie, but over 40% of the account of the network that we scanned were of high risk of total compromise due to service accounts being present on a majority of the machines in them. Not just service accounts, but the credentials for those accounts. For those of you interested, we'll provide, you can't see anything here, so we'll provide the research in the notes, and you are able to go and see some more details on it. But the problem of service accounts and of credentials embedded in those services and automated processes is a real one and actually present in a lot of networks. An important point to note here is that we said that those service accounts are used by automated process. It is often the case that the same account is used in parallel by a human user. And when it's used by a human user, it creates dual exposure, because both the human users and the automated processes leave behind those credentials. So we've covered the out service accounts, basically all those accounts that are used by automated processes operating in the network. Now we are going to discuss the in service accounts, those that are associated with SPNs and are listening for incoming connection.
So SPN, service principal name, is basically what represent in services, like Andrey said, in the domain. So those are contain the service type, the host name, and sometimes the port the service is listening on. So actually, when you RDP between two computers, you actually request access to the terminal services on that computer. So if you have a shared printer, you actually request access to the file and printer service on that print server. So in other words, you basically request access to the SPN, which represent that service, when you need access to something. If you have a SharePoint, you actually request access to the web service, and if this SharePoint uses a backend database, the SharePoint actually need to request access to that database also. So we have a lot of SPNs in the network, and all of those SPNs are registered in the Active Directory, and are easily discoverable using built-in Microsoft tools. So how it works? The client authenticates to the domain and requests access to a service, right? So the domain controller will issue a ticket or TGS for that service, which will be signed and encrypted using a secret which is only known by the domain controller and the service. So when the user gets this ticket, he cannot read or tamper that ticket, and when it represents it to the service can decrypt it using the secret and authorize the user based on the information on the ticket. So that secret I'm talking about is actually the service account password hash. So when you join a computer to the domain, it automatically creates an SPN to that machine. When you create a new Microsoft SQL instance with the domain admin credentials, it will also create automatically an SPN using this domain admin, running on this domain admin. So Basically, most of the SPNs will be created automatically, so you don't need to bother about this. And they are, and even if you delete this SQL instance, the SPN will still be in the Active Directory, so you actually can still request tickets to that service, even if it's not available anymore. So we have to manually delete this SPN in order to delete it. Another thing is, another interesting point is that the same account can be used with many SPNs. They can be with different service types on different machines.
So, as Matan said, most of the SPNs will be created automatically and will use the computer accounts, but some of them will be using user accounts. And this is one way to set up a new service. Just use the set SPN command, and we define here a web server listening on a server, and we define the account that it's going to be used, right? Damien is the account. And what's interesting about this is that those SPNs that are configured with user accounts, they are exposed to different risks than those configured with computer accounts. So what are those different risks? Well, first of all, the accounts themselves, they are creating an issue. Usually our computer accounts are not overprivileged, right? Because this is just a machine in the network, and there are set privileges for those computers. But the user accounts can be potentially overprivileged. For example, the example that you saw earlier, we used an administrative account in order to configure that web server, which is bad. The ticket request by anyone for ZSPN will be legitimate. This is the same issue whether it's a computer account or a service or a user account. Any user can request a ticket to any SPN in the network. And potentially, the same account will be used to run multiple services on multiple machines. Okay, so if one is compromised, it is possible for an attacker now to compromise others as well. The password policy, we already touched on that the password policy for those service accounts is different, and they usually change from that of a standard user. We know that very often those passwords are set to never expire. You saw the example earlier for those automated processes going out. It's the same happens for SPNs, services that are listening for incoming connection. And they are usually configured to use NTLM hashes instead of AES, which are the stronger hashes. And with NTLM, it's basically an unsalted RC4, which potentially can be problematic, right? So in this, I don't know, you can see that. So at least it doesn't use desk encryption, but it also doesn't use AES 128 or AES 256 by default, which means that it is potentially crackable, especially if the password that is used for that user account that we configure in SPN is a weak one.
Car with Grandpa. Thank you.
Bart, what are you doing? Disable auto drive.
Enter password.
Foolish boy. You'll never guess Elon Musk's master password. Musk rules with a Z.
Password verified. Manual control enabled.
Okay, so if the password is an easy one, we can crack and break it. And this is what we are going to demonstrate now. And for this work, we would like to thank Tim Medin for his work on Kerberos, for those of you familiar with that. We expanded it a bit.
So basically, we've created a script which is available on GitHub, which requests a Kerberos ticket for a given SPN. Then I will show what we can do with it. So let's start. So I'll request a ticket for the SPN we manually created earlier. I will just hack it now. You didn't see it. Okay, so as you can see, I now have a ticket. I have a ticket for the web service we just created under the Demian user account. And the ticket is encrypted using RC4, and you barely see the encrypted part of the ticket. So why does it help me? Basically, we said that the ticket is encrypted using the ticket is encrypted using the service account password hash, which means that the password hash of Demian account. So when I have the ticket, all I need to do is know what is the password is to enable to decrypt it. So 2 weeks ago, Hashcat, the famous password cracker, created a new hash mode which is able to offline crack Kerberos tickets. Basically what it does, it generates password hashes and try to decrypt the ticket. If it succeeds, we know what the password is, right? Secret. So we don't want to waste your time to see our cracking passwords here. So we take this ticket earlier and brute force it using Hashcat. So is the proof. And Hashcat, using a standard graphics card, will take about 10 hours to crack 7 letters alphanumeric password, which is the Windows domain policy. So here we'll crack the password.
Okay, so we have a service account password. What can we do with it? Naturally, the first thing that we are going to do is to impersonate that service. After all, if it's a standard user account in the network, then we can log on with it. We can access network resources and use whatever privileges are granted to that service account in order to operate inside the network. Okay, impersonation. We can also go ahead and create silver tickets. So silver tickets, basically, as Matan mentioned earlier, in Kerberos, there is a pack component of the ticket where the privileges of the group membership of the account are described above among other information. And so if we have that secret password, we can craft our own tickets to that service, making it possible for us to gain any sort of privileges to that service and potentially to the whole machine on which that service is running. So this is called the silver ticket as opposed to golden ticket, which I'm sure all of you heard about, the grant us operation in the entire network. This is specific to that one service. And there are some other stuff that we are still researching, so you can follow our work, and I hope in the next few months we'll be able to provide some new stuff. Let's try to see all the ways that we've discussed up until now for an attacker to gain credentials in the network. So users, whenever they connect to machines in the network and have interactive sessions, leave behind credentials that an attacker can steal. Services, again, or automated processes, when they connect to machines in the network, leave behind credentials that an attacker who compromises that machine can steal more. We have the services themselves that are using credentials. So on the machine from which that automated process connects, there are credentials, such as those credentials in the in that breach example that I discussed, where those credentials were embedded in the VB scripts, and also those 300 machines that we showed earlier, which have those credentials embedded in them. And we have services with SPNs, so an attacker can request tickets to those services and break them in order to retrieve their password and their credentials. So it's mainly a question of whether the attacker is able to discover those SPNs, those services that are configured with user accounts and could potentially be lucrative for exploitation. And for that, we have another script.
So we have another script which is available on GitHub too, which actually find the risky SPN in your network. So we previously showed how we can crack those tickets, but how from an attacker perspective I decide which ticket I want to crack offline? It takes time to crack, right? So here's the magic goes. Yes. So basically what the script does, it finds all the sensitive groups in your network and then find all the user accounts associated with SPN. Then it takes all that SPNs and find which are the services that are running them and check if they are available in the network. And then we have a map, we have a table which shows all the accounts and their properties. So here's how it looks. Yes, okay. So the script found 3 user accounts which are using RC4 as the encryption type for tickets. They set to never expire. So all of them are member of a sensitive group, some kind of a sensitive group. And they are having multiple SPNs, like in the third example, they are running 3 instances of SQL services and on different databases servers. So in other words, we have 3 accounts which potentially have a guessable password. They are weakly encrypted and they have high permissions on the network, which makes them very interesting for an attacker to exploit.
Okay, so now you can find all those SPNs in your network that can be abused. What can you do about it and about the surface created, the attack surface created by those service accounts? Well, first of all, delete all those unused SPNs and disable all those used accounts. It's a very basic technique that is often overlooked. So just look at them and make sure that you don't have anything that you don't need in your network. You should avoid dual accounts. Dual accounts are those accounts that are used by both human users and services, and there shouldn't be any such accounts. You should create dedicated granular accounts for every service that is running your network, and they shouldn't use any actual human user account. You should change the encryption types used by those accounts to AES, as those are much more difficult to break than the RC4, unsalted RC4 used for NTLM hashes. And you should employ the least privilege approach. In this specific case, usually means switching to computer accounts when possible, switching to local accounts. Many services are running with excessive privileges or with domain accounts when they could run just fine with local accounts. And there is also the option to use virtual accounts. Virtual accounts are accounts that are local, that are used exclusively by services. There are local accounts on those machines, and whenever the service needs to access some network resource, they will use the computer account of the machine that they are running on in order to conduct that network operation. So it's like a combination of both worlds. You should also manage those accounts and enforce strong and complex credentials for them. There are great systems that do password rotation and enforce strong password policy, and you should definitely look into them. They can manage service accounts as well. You can also look into managed accounts, managed service accounts. This is a special type of setting for an account that forces, basically, the default is again 30 days, same as for a computer account. It forces a password rotation for them as well. You should use credentials management to avoid any hard-coded credentials, especially in automated processes. Almost in every network that we looked into, there are hard-coded credentials, either hard-coded in automated processes themselves, in scripts, in config files next to the service or the process. So just replace all of them with a call to a central system that will provide those credentials on demand, or with a central system that will manage, at least for those legacy scripts where you can't remove the hard-coded credentials, that will at least be able to manage them. And you should monitor the use of service accounts. As we said, many of those service accounts can be overprivileged, and if you deploy some monitoring in your network, this is one of the areas to focus on. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about behavior analytics, user behavior analytics. They are dealing with building profiles and detecting anomalies against those profiles. So service accounts is a very interesting thing to look into. What our research showed that they are somewhat challenging to use analytics on, and also they become doubly challenging when you are using dual accounts. So if the same account is used both by a human user and by an automated process, the profile becomes very problematic and challenging to address. So to sum the whole thing up, which we've discussed up until now, service accounts and the services in general are prevalent in our networks, both used to connect to other resources as automated processes and those listening for incoming connections. Their accounts are often overlooked, and you need to know where they are and what their parameters are. You can use our tools, you can use our tool, or you can use our tool, either our tools or our tools, whatever you want to use. But you can look for the credentials that they leave behind, or you can use the script that Matan showed earlier. It's available on GitHub in order to look for the risky SPNs in your environment. And you should manage them. This is the most important part. If you don't manage them, if you are not aware, they are an attack surface in your network. So with that, we'll just give our thanks to Tim Medin and his work on Kerberos that is inspired some of our scripts, to Hashcat for John Bruriker for adding the Kerberos break-in functionality, to our customers who shared with us data on their networks, and to our colleagues back at CyberArk who supported and participated in this research. All the scripts will be available, as I said earlier. The research is available as well. And we'll be happy to hear any questions. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you. Questions there? Sorry? Excellent. Okay, so if you can send me an email, we'll add it to GitHub as well. A pointer. Any other suggestion?
It sounds like you said if you decrypt the ticket, you can craft your own and modify the facts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can use that to escalate privilege by putting yourself in groups you're not actually in.
Exactly, yes. This is the silver ticket vector that we described. Basically, you heighten the privileges against that specific service, which potentially can gain you excessive privileges on the whole machine, and it can lead you to do interesting stuff through it. Other questions? Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thanks for everybody for hanging out. On behalf of Fitbit and from BSidesSF, we have gifts for you both. And let's have another round of applause. Thank you.
That's really awesome.
I know. You guys got a little bit.
Wah, ini ממש מ-40 דקות.
עדיף ככה. קהל היה...
Should work. Yes. That'll do it. Okay. Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's amazing what you're doing. I love this. So talented. And drawing.
But it's not really there, so that doesn't really make sense. Is that coming through? Yep. I'm next.